Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
California approves sweeping new emission standards that could reshape the American automobile industry. A victory for the city of Richmond, which was chosen as the site for the second campus of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab after an intense competition by half a dozen East Bay cities. The battle over building a stadium for the San Francisco 49ers in Santa Clara may be headed to court. Also, Mayor Quan on the challenges of her first year in office and what's ahead for Oakland. Coming up next. Good evening. I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel are C.W. Nevius, San Francisco Chronicle's columnist; Amy Standen, reporter with KQED's Science and Environment series, Quest; and Paul Rogers, San Jose Mercury News environment writer. Paul Rogers, now the California Air Resources approved this. What impact can we expect, or should it have?
Well, this is these rules that were approved today, 9-0 in Los Angeles by the California Air Resources Board, are the most far-reaching, toughest environmental laws on cars ever passed in the United States. And so over the next decade, they're going to dramatically change the kind of vehicles that you see on the roads around the Bay Area, in showrooms. You're going to see a lot more electric vehicles, a lot more plug-in vehicles, maybe even a few hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, because they basically require three things. And the first is a 75% reduction in the amount of emissions that come out of tailpipes that cause smog. Now, California already has the strictest tailpipe standards in the United States, and a new car you buy right now emits about 98% less pollution than one from the 1980s. So we're going to take that clean cars already and make them 75% cleaner, 75% less smog. Second, there has to be a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The only way you do that is make cars that burn less gas. So by 2025, when this rule is finalized, cars in California will average 54 miles a gallon, the new cars, which is double the fleet average right now. And finally, this is the one that's getting all the attention, the so-called zero-emission vehicles rule. 15% of new cars sold by 2025 have to emit no pollution, and that means electric, plug-in hybrid, or fuel cells. That's 1.4 million vehicles that are going to be on the road in the next 13 years, and right now there's only 10,000 of them.
And that's the question, is 1 out of 7 is going to be sold, but are people going to buy them? I mean, that's
right.
The real question, isn't it?
That is the Holy Grail. And what's interesting is the auto industry supported this rule. You know, they were, over years past, they fought many times and sued the Air Resources Board. Remember, the Air Resources Board, it was created in 1967 by Ronald Reagan, and they were the first in the country to ban leaded gasoline, the first to require smog checks, catalytic converters, and all of the other states eventually and the federal government copy what we do. And the auto industry has often fought. This time they didn't, although the car dealers associations were fighting it, saying, we don't know if we can sell these. The auto people said, you know, you're syncing up some of these rules for the first time with federal rules that President Obama is putting in. They like that. And also, they're having to do this stuff in Europe, in Japan, and other places already. And as you can see, some of these cars are already hitting the road. You can buy a Nissan Leaf right now, which is all electric, or a Chevy Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid.
Now, I'm sorry, Amy, but part of the non-fight by the industry has to do a little bit with their government loans, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's funny because this doesn't get the attention that it should, but far and away, the most significant environmental action taken by President Obama in his first term was in 2009 when Detroit was bankrupt. It was, you know, on death's door. He brought him in, he said, I will give you tens of billions of dollars in loans But there's a condition. This was Tony Soprano-like. You better not fight. You cannot fight or sue anymore on these environmental laws. They had a Rose Garden ceremony with the environmentalists. They all shook hands. He raised the gas mileage standards from 27 to 35, and California immediately said, well, we're going to up you that over the next decade, and it's going to 54. So now he is syncing up with California. And basically, the dramatic reductions you're going to see in smog, in use of foreign oil, greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, I cannot overestimate that this was an issue that was stalled for many years in Congress. Remember, the Detroit Democrats wouldn't let gas mileage be raised, and the Texas Republicans and the oil guys, they wouldn't let it. And this is really the tipping point. Just in the next year, you're going to see 6 or 7 major new models for sale. The Ford Focus, which is all electric, the plug-in Toyota Prius, which is going to get 82 miles to the gallon. That's coming to showrooms in March. So these things are real. They're here.
And what kind of range are we going to see on these? I mean, is battery technology to the point where people can get more than 80 miles out of their car?
That's what's changed a lot. When the Air Board tried to do this 10 or 15 years ago, the battery technology was not really good enough to make a very feasible car that people could afford. The battery technology now, basically copying the same kind of batteries we have in cell phones and putting them in cars, is much better. It's cheaper. It's getting better all the time. You can do about 100 miles or more on an electric car without plugging it in. You get in the carpool lane. That's another big perk for people. And most people don't drive more than 100 miles a day. So you're going to see a lot more of these on the streets.
Now, we raised the specter of exploding batteries, though. And that's one of those things that all you need to do is hear that, and you're thinking, do I want to get in one of these cars or not?
Well, that was overblown. If your car gets in an accident, the gas engine can blow up too. But the Chevy Volt had a small problem. Federal government
explosion. Well,
in some crash tests, some of the batteries, they had a plastic housing around them, and there were 2 examples where they had a fire. They put a metal housing around it, so the federal government says it's fixed now. But if you don't like the Volt, there's plenty of others to choose from. Now, the question is, what happens if the public doesn't buy them? And, they're going to revisit this rule in 5 years, and then they might have to change it if the public isn't buying them.
Well, we're going to make this the good news program. Good news, at least for some parts of the East Bay. Tell us about the Lawrence Labs and their decision over where to locate their second.
This decision is almost a year in the coming. Lawrence Berkeley Lab has been overflowing from its campus in the Berkeley Hills, and so the question has been, they need a second campus. Where are they going to put it? There's no more room up near the UC. So the lab said, okay, Bay Area, tell us what you've got. And they had 20 submissions, 6 cities made the final list, and just last week Richmond was selected as the ultimate future home. And it really is, for Richmond, a really good news story. And things have been turning around in Richmond for a while. I mean, the biggest employer for forever has been Chevron. So this is very much a city sort of rooted to old technology, old industry. And so what this signals is very sort of avant-garde, high-tech, new industry starting up in Richmond, and the question is whether we're going to be talking about the Lawrence Richmond National Lab one of these days. So no, it's great news for the people of Richmond.
And for people who may not be familiar with what Lawrence Berkeley National Lab does and what all the scientists up there work on, can you give them the sort of Reader's Digest version?
Lawrence Berkeley Lab is known for particle physics research. This is the lab that has produced 16 elements in the periodic table of elements. 13 Nobel Prizes have been won based on work done there. Pioneering work in biofuels. I mean, that's some of the work that people are really excited about now. This is people who are going to figure out how we can run our cars on plants one day.
Battery technology, I think they do up there.
They do a lot of battery technology.
Yeah.
So it's just a cutting-edge national research lab that is not connected to the weapons research that people, there's always a lot of confusion about Lawrence Livermore versus Lawrence Berkeley. Lawrence Berkeley is very much sort of the renewable energy and physics lab.
It's a pretty illustrious group, actually, the cities that wanted this lab. Richmond came out ahead, which was great. I was surprised to see people in Albany kind of mounting a protest. What would be the downside of having a lab like that in your city?
Well, I mean, in Albany, that has long been a very controversial piece of land. It's for zoning reasons. It's a place where you would have to pass a ballot measure in order to get approval to build there. There's also a racetrack there that a lot of people have very sort of sentimental attachment to. People who run the racetrack would rather not be running a racetrack in Albany. It's much more land than they need. It's more seats than they need. That industry is sort of struggling, which is why they invited Lawrence Berkeley to come get sited there. But you know, you're right, though. I mean, there was less opposition to this project than you would see with almost any other project that you could think of. I mean, Lawrence Berkeley is the kind of institution that a lot of Bay Area cities really wanted to be able to call their own.
The one city that probably was at the top of the list and being disappointed was Alameda, right?
Alameda. Well, Alameda is saddled with this giant former base that is basically vacant. I mean, there's a few things happening on it, but it really needs something to kind of root that, you know, sort of bring life back to that area. And what Lawrence Berkeley sort of promised, which housing projects don't promise, is jobs. And Alameda put up a big, heartfelt sort of proposal to try and lure the lab there, and ultimately they didn't get it. It's a little farther away than a lot of the other sites. There was a requirement that you would have to get from Lawrence Berkeley to whatever the ultimate site was in 20 minutes, and Alameda.
And that's important, right? Because they're not completely moving away from their current location, the Berkeley Hills.
No, this is, this is going to be the life sciences division of Lawrence Berkeley. So it's people working on biofuels and medicine, and so it's work that's related to what will be happening in the hills, but there's going to be a lot of back and forth and collaboration between the two campuses, so it needed to be reachable.
And can you just address the perception of Richmond, because this is such a huge moment as a turnaround for them, because Richmond's had nothing but not nothing, but they've had a lot of publicity about bad publicity. Right. They must be over the moon.
They're over the moon, and I think that was part of the attraction of the site. There was no NIMBYism. I mean, this was the entire community coming together and saying, "We want you," which was not totally the case in places like Albany, as you pointed out. So
there was one compelling reason, though, why they decided on Richmond.
Thank you. I mean, I think a lot of people, one of the questions that people were asking after this came out was it always going to be Richmond? And you just sort of put all these other cities through the motions of putting together these expensive proposals. Richmond, the site is already owned by the UC, by the University of California, Berkeley, and there's earthquake research going on there. There's a wood products lab going on there. So it was kind of an obvious site, and it was always put out there was sort of the default, the status quo, the site against which other sites had to sort of distinguish themselves, and ultimately they didn't.
Well, we're going to stay in the site business here. We'll move over to Chuck Nevius here, and let's talk about a site for this fabled team that had so many up on a high and then had so many who fell.
That was a sad.
depths.
We don't have to discuss last Sunday, I hope. We don't have to talk about that. But yes, it's proving to be a lot more difficult to get a stadium for the 49ers than you would think. And in the glory days, when the 49ers and the NFL and so forth were really able to put these things together, every neighborhood, every area was able to build a stadium. Now it's kind of like when you want to buy a house and the housing market's falling apart. You can't really put these things together. They're unbelievably expensive. The one in Santa Clara is $1 billion. They don't really return very well because you only really have 10 football games. You have 8 regular season games, 2 exhibition games. You've got to make a lot of money in a hurry. And the people in Santa Clara are starting to get a little bit of cold feet, which is understandable. So now they're looking at other options. But I think you'll have to say, and we could talk about this, Santa Clara right now is the option. The Yorks, the people who own the 49ers are committed to it. The people of Santa Clara have voted for it. They are on track to do this. Whether or not it pencils out, I'm not really sure. But I think Santa Clara has to stand or fall before they go somewhere else. And that's kind of where we are right now.
And what happens if they fall?
Well, that's a great question. And of course, the Fair Play Santa Clara is coming up with the idea that they said we were sold a pig in a poke here. We voted for this in 2010, and it was going to cost $850 million. Now it's going to cost $1 billion. That's not what we voted for. And of course, and they collected signatures to put this back on. And the city attorney said, "Oh no, you voted. We've already had a vote on this," and the city council voted to go ahead and proceed with it. Whether or not it pencils out, that's going to be the real issue. And then also, if Fair Play Santa Clara decides to take it to court, what's their option there? What it all looks like is more delays for a stadium and more time spent in Candlestick, which is, as we've all mentioned, that was dedicated by Richard Nixon in 1960, and he was only the vice president then. That's how old this is.
Now, there has been, it seems to me, some denial among San Franciscans, particularly 49ers fans, that this team would never leave and go to this other county to the south. But as you mentioned, the vote was more than 60% two years ago, a year and a half ago. They have $800 million in financing from people like Goldman Sachs. So this isn't the back of the envelope thing. They've got the money. And they're talking about doing work on the site in the next few months. I mean, shovels in the ground.
Yeah.
This is pretty far along. I mean, is there any proposal in San Francisco at all, or I mean?
Well, the obvious choice is the Lennar proposal in Hunter's Point.
Yeah.
But I think Santa Clara has to die before that even starts, and that starts from ground zero. The Lennar people threw this in as a nice incentive for them to be able to develop this area. Lennar doesn't care if they build a stadium or not. They'd prefer not to have a stadium. They can build that many more houses.
And there are no other sites in San Francisco that are advanced.
It's not going to happen anywhere else in San Francisco, and I think you're right. I think they're in denial. It's the old, but we're San Francisco. How could you possibly not stay here?
And they're still going to be called the San Francisco 49ers.
Well,
You're not quite as old as I am, but I can remember when people used to talk the same way about what would happen to the Giants. There's no other place for them to go, and look what we have.
Right, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think, I'll tell you what, it's not going to change my season tickets because I sit on the couch and watch on TV, and that's what most people do. It's going to be, if Santa Clara takes off and works, it's going to be a nicer facility. It's not going to be that much farther away. They're still going to be called the San Francisco 49ers, and hopefully the team will do well. They're across the street from the training facility. I mean, it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. We'll see how it works out, but I don't think the alternative is there.
Well, you sort of missed my point about the Giant Stadium.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That point was that
happens
people
to me a
said it couldn't happen,
it couldn't
and
be
it
done.
did.
Right,
All
right.
you need is the Larry Bear or somebody like that to come along.
Or like McGowan. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. But what they did is went out and financed it themselves, and they took out a mortgage, and they basically did like a house. And that's the question: is what is the debt service going to be on this stadium? It's going to be enormous. But if they get it done, I think it'll be a great thing.
Well, we spend more time talking about stadiums in this world today, and yet, with all of the numbers coming out and the amount of money spent, people still are willing to get out and risk on these.
Well, particularly for the NFL. I mean, the NFL is an incredibly popular sport in the United States. I mean, we're about to have the Super Bowl. 3 of the top 4 all-time most watched TV programs ever, 3 of them are Super Bowls. I mean, the other one was the Farewell of MASH. Year in and year out, it delivers ratings. It is a money machine. The problem is that you're now concerned about how many people are watching on TV. You watch high-def TV, you see it on slow-mo, you see it on super slow-mo. There's plenty of opportunity. Why do you want to go to the stadium and pay $35 to park, to pay $15 for a hamburger?
Yeah.
You'd rather stay at home.
But there's a lot of money and a lot of people in Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, that's what they're counting on. They're counting on
Yeah.
those seat licenses that Silicon Valley will be able to do.
We're going to now turn to another city that always has a lot of hope of getting something. We turn to Oakland. There's no question that Mayor Jean Quan's first year in office has been a challenging one. She's faced sharp criticism for her handling of the volatile Occupy Oakland movement, and her car was surrounded by angry activists in Washington, D.C. last week. The loss of state redevelopment funds means city jobs will be cut at a time when the city's budget is tight. Still, Quan balanced the city's budget twice, hired a new city manager, and is still extremely engaged in neighborhood activism. However, there is an effort underway to recall her. KQED's Scott Schaefer spoke with Mayor Quan earlier.
Mayor Quan, welcome.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year. Sunday
Thank you very much. Well, your term, you're about a year into it now, and
almost a year. Almost exactly a year.
And it began with great promise and hope, and it's been a tough year. It's been a tumultuous year, and I want to talk with you a little bit about something that just happened this week, which is the budget. The city is about to lose about $28 million in redevelopment money. There was a kind of a raucous city council meeting on Wednesday night when you kind of rolled out how you're going to balance the budget. There was a lot of anger at that meeting, and I'm just wondering, do you think the anger at these cuts is justified?
You know, it is always hard, and particularly the Oakland employees have given up so much. As you know, I actually think we still have great promise. It's been a very tough year, and yes, when you're a new mayor, there's a lot of optimism, and I faced a lot of challenges, but even then, when I became mayor, I had a $58 million deficit, I had no reserves, and we worked really hard with our employees at the beginning of the year. We got
you got some concessions,
We got
didn't you?
huge concessions. They had given up 5% the year before. They gave up 10% this year. The police who had never paid into their pensions paid into their pensions, and everybody went to 2-tier on pensions. So the employees felt they really gave. And in terms of our budget, we're actually in probably the best shape of the whole decade.
Yeah.
But then redevelopment happened.
Well,
and
I want to
that's a
ask you
huge
about
amount.
that because this is the brainchild of your predecessor, Jerry Brown, who's now the governor. Do you feel, in a sense, and it's not just Oakland, it's cities all over California that are feeling this pinch now. Do you feel, in a sense, that he's betrayed Oakland by leaving you in a bit of a hole?
Yeah, I think it's hard for Jerry. Nobody saw that this recession would drag on so much. You know, when I watch Barack Obama, at least somebody who I know is probably in more pain than me, but Jerry also has a very tough situation. Quite frankly, Arnold Schwarzenegger put the deficit on a credit card for 4 years, and now there's no choice but to cut, and bad choices. What we're saying, though, about redevelopment is because of the court decision, not only does Jerry not get ongoing money for the schools, which he would have in the deal that was struck last August, we don't have the opportunity to use redevelopment to have economic growth. So it was sort of the worst of both worlds. And when the legislature passed the two bills, they expected, one, to take away the old redevelopment, and two, create a new redevelopment where they got more money for the schools. So the court said, you can't have redevelopment, but you also can't bribe the cities and make them give you more money. But by striking that down, there's no mechanism for affordable housing, for brownfields, for fixing blighted neighborhoods.
But you're going to have to live with that. The police department.
I think that there will be some compromises and we'll
in the
bring some
legislature.
things back.
The police department I want to talk to you about. It's also been in some turmoil, and this week federal judge Thelton Henderson told the police department that the acting chief, the interim chief, needs to check off any big decisions with a court-ordered, court-appointed monitor. Why has it taken so long? It's been 9 years. It's a problem you inherited. It's a problem your predecessor inherited. Why has it taken so long to adopt what the judge feels are some very basic reforms?
Well, first of all, let me just correct you. The judge said on anything having to do with the negotiated settlement agreement, that's on the civil rights issue. So the judge doesn't want to run the police department. He doesn't care about my 100 blocks or how I'm fighting crime in general. But he's saying because we're about to make some major reforms, I think, that will be long lasting, that before those are put in effect, he wants us to check off with the monitor. And if the chief and the monitor disagree, then the chief has to come to us.
But why has it taken so long? Because it has been 9 years. I mean, obviously the judge is very frustrated.
I think, quite frankly, in the past that we had chiefs that didn't take much action, and that it's very hard to make a cultural change. You could change the policies, but then getting people to change it, to me, it's like racism. When I was a young college student, I fought for ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. That didn't end racism, but it put some structures in place to teach people about minorities here.
Well, and you point out your past. You were an activist, you were an organizer, you were very much a part of the community, and there's a certain irony, isn't there, that Occupy Oakland has turned against you the way it has. I mean, you were in Washington, D.C., your car was surrounded. Why is it, do you think, that it has struck such an angry note with them?
Well, I think first of all, there's Occupy and Occupy. I think with most Oakland residents, they're getting pretty tired of the Bay Area-wide Occupy movement that uses Oakland as its staging ground.
But you don't see that kind of anger in, say, in San Francisco, where Mayor Lee handled it in a different way.
Well, you know, you guys use tear gas and batons too. I think it's a different time. It's how the media plays it. There's also probably a little misogyny and a little racism when I looked at what happened in terms of how the national the media portrayed it and how Occupy's internal media portrayed it. But the reality...
You think they're tougher on you because you're a woman and an Asian woman?
I've been pretty disturbed that I had to stop my Facebook for a while and spend a lot of time putting in new filters and cleaning it up, and that Occupy doesn't listen to anybody but its own media. They have their version of what happened. It is not a true version. Oakland was in a very difficult situation. Right now, for instance, for the last few weekends, they've been marching through downtown. They've had vandalism. They've started fires. They disrupted the Lunar New Year in Chinatown. And instead, they're portraying it as the police are harassing them.
Yeah. We're short on time, and I apologize for that. But there are recall petitions on the streets in Oakland, and I know you're not focused on that, and I understand that. But what message do you have for folks who may be approached and may be asked to sign one of these petitions?
You know, I really haven't spent much time. As you've mentioned, I had a really busy year. You know, we're trying to reform our police department. I'm trying to adjust the budget once again, and I'm trying to still fight to maintain as much redevelopment as we can. I don't get much sleep. So what I've been saying to people is that recalls are supposed to be used when an official is corrupt or totally derelict. I don't think that's the case. People may disagree with me. Unfortunately, it only takes 10% to get the signatures on the street.
But what's your message to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, you know, the Labor Council, Democratic clubs, the Chinese community have come out to oppose the recall in a really big way.
But what's your message? What would you tell them?
What I say is I think the recall is divisive, it's unfair, it'll be expensive for the city, and it will destabilize how people see Oakland. Oakland has just been named one of the 5 places to visit in 2012, one of the I think we're the 15th most educated city in the country.
Got a lot going for it.
We have a lot going for it, and most people that I talk to want to keep the city moving forward because despite the recession, Oakland created 5,000 new jobs. We had more new business licenses in a long time, and there's a lot of investment happening in Oakland right now.
And it is the year of the dragon. You're
and
dressed
it's the
in
year
red.
of the dragon.
Gung Hei Fat Choi.
And thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope all your wishes come true.
I hope the year of the dragon is prosperous as it's supposed to be.
Thank you.
And my thanks to all of you here for joining us tonight. Now an update on a story that we previously reported on. The California Supreme Court ruled today that the state Senate maps drawn by the Citizens Redistricting Commission will be used in this year's upcoming elections. Republican groups had asked the courts to put the new districts on hold, pending a drive to repeal them. Some say the new maps favor the Democrats' ability to pick up 2 extra seats, giving them the 2/3 majority necessary to raise taxes without Republican support. For more, visit us at kqed.org/thisweek. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.